Thank you. Thanks for having me. Um, in my lab, we study how different factors motivate our performance. And those factors could be incentives, such as monetary incentives or social incentives, or costs, how effortful something feels, and why that makes us do the things that we do. And to do that, oh, and to do that, we use a combination of behavioral experiments, well-controlled behavioral experiments, in which we have individuals interact with virtual environments that allow us to very precisely tailor the stimuli they come in contact with. And we also use functional neuroimaging. So we'll put people in an MRI scanner while they're doing these behavioral experiments so we can look at how the brain processes the incentives that they're seeing and how that gives rise to their performance. We combine the data from these behavioral experiments and functional brain imaging to generate mathematical models of brain and neural activity. And then we use those mathematical models to sort of inform basic mechanisms of brain function, with our end goal being to diagnose and treat disorders in which motivation is a problem, such as depression or schizophrenia. So that's just a general overview of the tools that we use in our lab. And I thought today what I'd do is talk about a specific set of experiments that we did to look at one aspect of motivation, which is the idea of effort and fatigue. And so as an example, we can sort of understand effort and reward and things that motivate us. When we're doing some work, we might say to ourselves, you know, after a bout of work, I'm going to reward myself and go get a cup of coffee, right? And so you might make the decision to walk down the hall. This was clearly before the pandemic and we were all working at home. Walk down the hall to the coffee shop in your building and get a mediocre cup of coffee. Or you might say, look, I did a really good job at my work. I'm going to go down across town, put in more effort, and go and get a really nice cup of coffee at the fancy coffee shop across town. So here, there's the reward that's at stake, which is the coffee, but also the effort that you need to put in to get it, right? Whether you want to go all the way across town, put in that effort to get that really nice cup of coffee, or you might say, look, I'm just going to take it easy and walk down the hall. And this is seems like sort of a trivial example, but we can think of a lot of neurological and psychiatric disorders in which feelings of fatigue and disruptions in your effort come into play and make it difficult to make this choice. So one of the classic symptoms of depression is a feeling of fatigue, and that's very well documented, but it isn't very well understood neurobiologically why that happens and why certain individuals might feel fatigue and others don't. And so we wanted to design a set of experiments that looked at what happens in your brain when you're making decisions about effort and when you're fatigued, and why there are individual differences between people and how they perceive effort and fatigue. And so to do this, we designed an experiment where we had people exert effort in an MRI scanner. So individuals would be in an MRI scanner where we could image their brain activity while they were exerting effort. And in this case, the effort that they were exerting was gripping a hand grip sensor that allowed us to record the forces that they produced to exert effort. So in this way, the effort task that we used allows us to very precisely measure the forces that they're exerting and translate those into the efforts that they felt and understand their decisions about effort. And so the task that we had people do was first to understand an association between units of effort and what they felt like. So we wanted to set up a currency of effort that people would experience, and then have them make decisions about that effort and look at how those decisions shifted when they felt fatigued. And so we basically created units of effort that ranged from 0 to 100 units of effort. And 100 units of effort corresponds to their maximum level of exertion. In this case, you see a trial in which somebody is presented with 30 units of effort. So they saw the amount of effort that they needed to exert. They gripped that hand grip sensor that I just told you about and filled up a thermometer till they reached this 30 units of effort line. They were told whether they were successful or whether they failed. And we repeated this through the range of effort. So on some trials, they were presented with 100 units of effort, 50 units of effort. The idea of this association phase was that for them to get an idea of how these different units of effort felt. So what the currency of effort was, so that eventually we could have them make choices about effort. And these were risky choices. So we told them, after they had learned these associations, to basically make decisions between flipping a coin, one side corresponding to exerting a large amount of effort, so in this case 60 units of effort, or a small or no effort at all, or they could forego any risk and just do a sure small amount of effort. So here there can be different ways that you can avoid exerting effort. One way to avoid exerting effort is to choose the flip option and hope that it comes up, take the risk and hope that you come up with a zero effort option, right? But there's also the risk of coming up with this high effort option, right? Or you could take this a sure option, a sure small amount of effort for certain, right? And forego any risk. And what we found is that there's individual differences in people's willingness to take these risks for effort, okay? And since we scanned people's brains with fMRI, I went a little too far. So basically what we could do is we could give these effort choices. So we had 170 choices in sort of a baseline unfatigued state. And then we introduced choices interspersed with fatiguing exertion. So we had people grip on that force sensor 10 times, then make choices 10 times, 5 times they gripped on the sensor you see in black, and then 10 times they made choices. So basically we had choices in this baseline state and in a fatigued state, okay? And as I was saying, we had them make these choices when they were in the MRI scanner. So we could look at what was happening in the brain when they were making these decisions and what activity and what functional connectivity networks came online when people were making these choices. So what you see here are slices of the brain. So this is a slice of the brain sort of taken down the middle like this. I've sort of show the slice here. And this area that you see here is called the insula, and it's responsible for our interoceptive sense. So us thinking about how we feel about our internal sensations. This area right here is our motor cortex, and our motor cortex is responsible for generating movements or motor output to do the tasks that we want to do. And what we found is that there's some connectivity between the insula, our interoceptive area, and our motor cortex. And that connectivity between those two areas relates to our decisions to exert. Actually, what we found was those individuals who have, I apologize for the sirens in the background, those individuals who have strong connectivity between this interoceptive insular area and motor cortex have a good sense of their ability to exert effort, and they actually are willing to exert more effort and feel that they can persist. Those that feel more fatigued are the ones that have less connectivity between this area. So we think that what's happening is the reason people feel fatigued is there's sort of a mismatch between what they believe they can do and what their motor system is actually able to achieve. And we find a great deal of variation between those who have high connectivity and those who have low connectivity between those areas. And that connectivity profile can actually predict who's going to feel things are fatigued and who won't. Okay. And so this is sort of a toy example, but we think that this network could be responsible for a lot of the neurological and psychiatric conditions that are associated with fatigue. It's possible that we could target these brain areas with non-invasive brain stimulation or use cognitive reframing tasks to sort of have subjects or patients reframe how they feel about effort. And this might motivate them to be more willing to exert. And so the reason we think that this is very important, as I've mentioned a couple times, is because the current state of treatment of psychiatric disorders is to sort of have somebody come in, that they might have me come in, they say, well, Vic, you think you're depressed, you don't like to get out of bed in the morning, you have trouble focusing on tasks at work. Okay, I think that you're depressed, right? It's very, very subjective from a physician's standpoint. What we hope to do is take individuals and be able to do a battery of these well-controlled cognitive tasks. So I told you about tasks for effort, where people are making risky choices between exerting large amounts of effort and smaller amounts of effort. But we can also do monetary tasks to look at the other dimension of reward motivation, and use computational modeling to then precisely model these choices and generate parameters related to the motivational aspects of, say, effort and reward. And then rather than subjectively classifying, we can use our computational models to sort of cluster different types of fatigue, for example, depression, and have a more individualized assessment that allows to target very particularly diagnosis and treatment for specific people. So take a sort of a computational approach to target different motivational aspects for different types of people. So for example, a person with depression one person with depression might feel sensitivity to effort and not reward, while there might be other people with depression that feel sensitivity to reward and not effort, right? And so our hope is that our cognitive tasks and our computational modeling of these cognitive tasks will allow us to very precisely and objectively characterize individual differences in motivation across people. So that sort of concludes what I have, and I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Great. Many thanks, Vic. So now I will turn to questions for Vic from our attendees. Okay, and let me just pop that window up here. So the first is from David Fryer. Hope I pronounced the name right. What kind of experiences can affect or alter an individual's neural structure in the insula area of the brain?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what we think and what we're trying to do now is look at training techniques to sort of change structure. We found relationships actually between the structure of motor cortex and how people perceive effort. So individuals with a thicker motor cortex tend to find effort to be less costly. So we think that, as you say, that differences in structure in these areas can affect how you perceive effort. And one of the ways that we're trying to do that is through repeated training. So having people come in and do repeated training to sort of build up their neural structures to see if that'll sort of change their perceptions of fatigue and effort.
Okay. From Lila Guterman, how many people have you done these scans with, and how strong is the correlation between brain activity and fatigue or motivation?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the data that I've showed you here was for 20 subjects. We've since replicated this finding actually in a few different patient groups. So we're doing studies in depression and in Parkinson's disease. So our initial study was in 20 people, but we've now since replicated that in different patient groups and actually in healthy controls as well.
From Rebecca Critchfield, how would you get hospitals, insurance companies to pay for this type of treatment for patients? Who would cover the MRI, as they are usually expensive? Would this only be beneficial for those who can afford it? And how would that skew the data?
Yeah, that's a great point. So our hope is that the MRI is not needed for the computational psychiatry portion that I told you about. Our hope is that we can use low cost behavior to characterize these things. So the MRI is to basically give us an idea of the basic neural mechanisms to begin with, and then subsequently our hope is to be able to use the behavioral testing, which is pretty low cost. That all that requires is a computer and a force sensor to be able to deploy these tasks on thousands of people, generate a space of these parameters, and classify that space. So our eventual goal is to make it very low cost in the sense that it's all in behavior and we aren't reliant on neuroimaging.
Great. We got time for just a couple more. How big a range, sorry, this is from Miranda Hitty. How big a range did you see? Did you know if any of the participants had depression? And
Yeah,
also
so
from Miranda, how plastic is this? How changeable?
yeah, that's a good question. So we saw actually quite a bit of range in people's risk preferences, and there were this people in this study were sort of healthy controls, so they didn't have a great deal of depression, but those things were weakly correlated with their depression scores. And the question about plasticity of the network, we think that it will be plastic. And so right now we're doing the studies to sort of try and exploit plasticity through non-invasive brain stimulation of insula and motor cortex, but we're still trying to figure that out.
Okay. From Ashrifia Adamako Ankama, they ask, when people were feeling motivated or energetic, which choice were they more likely to make?
Yeah. So when people were more energetic, they were more likely to take the risk to exert a lot of effort. So they were more likely to be risk seeking. And when people were more fatigued, those that were more fatigued tended to be risk averse. They would just say, "Look, I'm just not going to take any chance and take that small, sure effort option."
Okay. So we're running short on time. I'll take one more. The questions keep coming in, which is great. Sorry if I'm not going to get to your question, but please feel free to reach out to Vic and there's a follow-up. So last one is from Miriam Tucker. Where does actual physical ability and disability fit into your model? Perhaps a person anticipates fatigue based on prior experience of adverse effects from effort.
Yep, that's great. So that's a very good point. So like your beliefs. So we have this interoceptive sense. So the question is, how is that built, right? And so previous experiences, there's a lot of things that go into how you feel about effort, right? And so your interoceptive sense can be built on what you think your abilities are, and what we're seeing is that this mismatch between these beliefs and what you actually do relates to fatigue, but we're still trying to figure out how that interoceptive sense is built.